Welcome to the case study related to the Bhopal gas tragedy investigation part, and this is the second part of this Bhopal gas tragedy because we have divided this particular module into two steps because it is one of the most worst industrial disaster of its time. So in the last module we had discussion about the plant site, the process involved, what kind of the scenario there was, the scene related to the release of the most dangerous methyl isocyanate. So in this particular module we will conclude about the investigation which were carried out by two agencies. One was attributed to the Union Carbide investigation team and second was the Government of India. So let us start with the remaining part of Union Carbide investigation. So a team from Union Carbide Corporation, they arrived on 6th of December, 3 days after the incident, and they were charged in terms of two aspects. One is to assist the safe disposal of the remaining MIC in the plant, and second was to investigate the accident and what went wrong. So the first task that was related to the safe disposal of the remaining MIC was completed by 22nd of December, and the team returned home on 2nd of January to carry out a series of experimentation to find out that what went wrong. Now this investigation team, they were having the controlled access of the plant because CBI, they took the charge of the entire plant. Now the team, they was allowed to the limited access of the plant record and personnel so that it cannot alter any record, that is the securing evidence aspect. And they were permitted to talk to certain persons, but they were not allowed to interview staff directly involved in that particular incident. So they were allowed to take the sample from the tank number 610, that was the main culprit tank, but they were not allowed to open it and inspect the tank and its piping to take the sample from elsewhere on the plant. So on their return to West Virginia, the investigators, they carried out a series of program of some 500 experiments to establish that what had occurred. So the most abundant component in the residues was MIC trimer, other than DMI, DMU, trimethyl urate and trimethyl biurate, etc. So there was also the contamination of iron, chromium, nickel, and approximately their proportion, whatever the proportion they are having in SS304 steel and some 5% chloride. So trimerization, that obviously occurred, but it was unclear that what other reactions they might have taken place in that particular arena. So the investigator carried out the experiments in which the principal material believed to have been in the tank, namely methyl isocyanate, chloroform, water, iron, and they heated up to 200 degrees Celsius. So the development of reaction scheme which counted for the production of starting from these material. So the plant record, the tank number 610 contained prior to the incident 40 ton of liquid. Now the team estimated that the tank 610 had originally contained 1000 to 2000 pounds of water and 1500 to 3000 pounds of chloroform, but still the source of water was uncertain. So the chloroform could be accounted for by the fact that MRS, MIC refining still was operated at the temperature higher than its normal one. So the preparation, during the preparation for shutdown MIC, a higher chloroform content has been sent to the tank number 610 rather than 619. So this was a committed mistake at that point of time. So the iron could have come from the corrosion given high chloroform and water content and high temperature. So the scenario which the investigator invoked, this can be explained in the sequential manner. which is as follows. The content of the tank 610, initially it was maintained at 15 to 20 degrees Celsius. That was much desired, and it was not having any kind of adverse effect. Some 1000 to 2000 pounds of water entered into tank in a manner which is unknown. The exothermic reaction between MIC, which we had earlier discussed in the previous module, that is started between MIC and water, this led to the increase in temperature and also pressure due to evolution of carbon dioxide. So whatever carbon dioxide that was evolved in due course of time was responsible for the pressure built up within this pressure vessel. So the higher temperature and the pressure of chloroform, this caused the accelerated corrosion, and the iron usually thus produced from the tank catalyzed the exothermic trimerization of MIC. So they have carried out a series of calculation. This showed that the reaction of some 40% of MIC would generate enough heat to vaporize the rest one. So this gave rise to some 36,000 pound of solid in the tank, but only estimated 10,000 pounds they were found in that particular tank. So the temperature reached was estimated as in the excess of 200 degrees Celsius as opposed to the desired one. Now these conditions would have been attained during the course of venting. So with the safety valve lifting at because it was designed to lift at 40 psig, the initial discharge would have been 10,000 pound per hour. So these report put forward the hypothesis that the water was directly introduced into the tank number 610 either deliberately or by mistake through the process vent line, nitrogen line or other piping. So it refers that washing operation on the filter pressure safety valve lines, and it states that this section line had not been inserted blind or not been isolated. So that was one of the reason why this water was introduced into the tank number 610. So the report draws attention to a number of factors which contributes to the accident. That this includes the fact that refrigeration had been discontinued. Previously we had a discussion that the refrigeration unit was turned off just because they have thought that the MIC is being stored rather than produced continuously. That a blind was not used to isolate the line being washed out. It is primarily it was required as per the MSDS and as per the safety norms of that particular plant. The MIC refining still was operated at higher temperature than the normal temperature. So if they would have been noticed this particular aspect, then they could have make the corrective measures so that the temperature of the MRS would have been corrected down. They have shut down the VGS vent gas scrubber just because the reason that MIC is not being produced continuously, it is being stored. The flare was out of commission, obviously the reason that we have already discussed. So just to cut short the measures of economy, they have reduced the number of safety operations, and those attempts led to this dangerous or devastating accident. So the Union Carbide officials they have carried out a press conference, and they suggested that the water may come from nearby utility station which supplied water and a nitrogen in that particular area. So if someone had connected a tubing of water line instead of nitrogen line, either deliberately or intending to introduce nitrogen into the tank, so this could account for the presence of the water. That may lead to the sabotage. Later on, the Union Carbide officials, they agreed that there was no direct evidence for this particular hypothesis, but they agreed that the water was introduced in that particular tank number 610. So apart from this, the high moisture content, that is aerosol in the discharge when evaporation gave rise to the heavy gas which rapidly sank to the ground. So this was the reason weather egged on the process. A weak wind which frequently changed the direction, which in turn helped the gas to cover more area in a shorter period of time, about 1 hour. And the weak vertical turbulence also caused a slow dilution of a gas, thus allowed the poisonous gas to spread over a considerable distance. So, the precise number of death and injuries at the Bhopal gas tragedy, they are still uncertain. The scale of accident was such that it led to the much confusion. The people have continued to die of the effect over a period of years. The Indian government estimate that the death toll about 2 years after the event was 1,754, that the compensation was paid off. By 1989, this had risen to 3,150, and by 1994 approximately 4,000. The other figures given are 30,000 permanently or totally disabled, 20,000 temporary cases, and 50,000 with a minor injury. So, one report says that in 1985 states that the number of people treated in state hospitals had been given in approximately 1,70,000. So, some 1,30,000 they were treated in Bhopal, various hospitals of Bhopal, mainly for lung and eye injuries. Some 40,000 in 22 other districts, and some around 12,000 of 1,70,000 were in the critical condition, and out of this 484 died. So, disaster led to various sets of court proceeding, and Government of India instituted a criminal proceeding against Union Carbide Corporation, and they become the party to the proceeding in United States courts. In 1987, Union Carbide Corporation made a final settlement with Government of India about 470 million US dollars. So, now the victim, they tried to challenge this in federal courts of United States, but the US Supreme Court ruled that they lacked legal standing to do so. Now let us have a discussion about the various safety measures in Union Carbide Corporation plant, the USA and in India. The Union Carbide plant in West Virginia was better equipped compared to the plant in Bhopal. There were a number of critical differences in level of design and operation of the Bhopal and the institute plants. Now these are some of the enlisted comparison between the Institute West Virginia plant USA and Bhopal Madhya Pradesh. The capacity, they were having the higher production of MIC matched with high processing capacity, and MIC not stored for long period of time, whereas in Bhopal they were having the high production capacity of MIC but low processing capacity, the further processing, that is in terms of a derivative plant, and MIC stored in the large quantity for a long period of time. So that is the difference between the West Virginia plant and Bhopal plant. Then emergency scrubber MIC stored tank, they equipped with emergency scrubbers to neutralize any escape of MIC, designed to operate under the emergency condition. However, in Bhopal plant at the time of accident, no emergency caustic scrubber to neutralize the MIC tank leak was present. About the computerized monitoring, the computerized monitoring of all the instruments like gauges, alarms, etc., and the process to support the visual observation was in place in West Virginia plant, whereas in Bhopal there was not at all a computerized monitoring of instrument and process, relied solely on the manual observations. As far as the cooling system is concerned, MIC field storage tank, they used a cooling system based on chloroform in West Virginia plant, whereas in Bhopal plant the MIC tank used a cooling system based on brine. They are highly reactive with the MIC. The refrigeration unit was also there in both the plants. So, in West Virginia plant, the refrigeration unit to control temperature in the tank was never turned off, whereas in Bhopal plant, the refrigeration unit had been turned off since June 1984. The nitrogen pressure, the MIC was always maintained under the nitrogen the pressure, whereas in Bhopal plant, the MIC tank had not been under the nitrogen pressure since October 1984. So, they have put all these cut short measures to save certain amount of money. In West Virginia plant, they were having an elaborated 4-stage emergency plan to deal with any kind of toxic releases, fire, etc., including a general public alert linked to the community police, river, and the rail traffic and the local radio stations. Whereas in Bhopal plant, no system to inform the public authorities or the people living adjacent to the plant, and there was no emergency plan shared with the communities living adjacent to the plant. So if you remember the accident chronology, then there was a communication gap between the plant officials and local authorities. About the maintenance plan, the maintenance program to determine and evaluate the replacement frequency for valves and instrumentation and alarm system. Whereas in Bhopal, there was no evidence of any effective instrumentation maintenance program, and safety valve testing program largely it was ineffective. As far as the lab analysis is concerned, a lab analysis of MIC was conducted to test quality and a check for contamination prior to the storage, processing or distribution in West Virginia plant, but in Bhopal there was no lab analysis being carried out for the quality check, and that was uncertain. The MIC stored for longer period without testing of any kind of contaminants. The training, the extensive employee training program was in place in West Virginia plant, whereas in Bhopal the operators put in charge without sufficient training. Now you can have a look of the photographs taken shortly after the accident. This is the pipe rack is shown this here in this arena, and a partially buried storage tank. There were 3 in total of our MIC located in the mid of the photograph, if you are able to locate them. Now this is the photograph of 20 years later. The flora covers the tank 610, which has been removed from the earthen mound. And this is the photograph near the filter area, and some of the critical components are identified in this particular photograph. This is the valve to the process vent header, and this one is for the filter area. Now this is the actual photograph of the spring relief valve, and this one is the rupture disc. So this is the photograph of tank 611 entry piping. Rupture disc is on the center here, somewhere here. The spring relief valve is behind the flora that has grown in over the years. Now this is the photograph of the scrubber system, that is vent gas scrubber which we were talking about. This is the flaring system which was disabled at the time of accident. These are the corroded tank with unknown contents lying below. So this is again a very crucial information for the accidental investigation. These are some of the photograph of the jumper lines, etc. You can see. Now this is the remote photograph of a gas vent scrubber, and this is the gas vent scrubber stack. Then the people analyzes about the possible reasons of this accident. So one of the main reason for the tragedy was found to be the result of the combination of human factor and incorrectly designed safety system, and not follow up of all those safety norms being laid down for MIC storage. So a portion of the safety equipment at the plant had been non-operational for 4 months and rest failed. So there was a serious lapse on the part of the government. The official responsible probably had not mandated any safety standards at that time. So Union Carbide, they failed to implement of its own safety rules, which was at the time of accident they used to follow in West Virginia plant. So the Bhopal plant experienced 6 accidents between 1981 to 1984, at least 3 of which involved the MIC or FOS gene. So they have sensitized, or they have sensed that there is some problem going on either with the MIC or FOS gene. Now there were several stakeholders of this particular plant and accident: the Union Carbide, the victims of a gas attack, those are employees plus persons, the local government, the member of community, the CEO of Union Carbide, the Greenpeace group. Now before the disaster, we have synchronized the accident chronology. The Union Carbide, they were compelled to cut off the cost and increase the profit. The victims of the gas attack, the safe working conditions, and they were demanding for equal pay. The local government, they ensure the safety of employees and prevent the environmental damage. The member of the community, they ensures that the environment is clean for the livelihood. The CEO of Union Carbide was intended to increase the profit as much as possible, and the Greenpeace group there to ensure the plant is not polluting the environment. So the responsibility of the stakeholders are just like this. Now, after the disaster, we are just comparing the involvement of all stakeholders. So, after the disaster, the Union Carbide was intended to pay as little compensation as possible and escape all its responsibility. The victims of the gas attack, they require the fair compensation. The local government, they ensure the victim get the fair compensation and assign the responsibilities for cleaning up the pollution caused by the plant. The member of the community, they were intended to help clean up the pollution. The CEO of Union Carbide, they escaping their responsibility and still they are escaping the responsibility. And the Greenpeace group, they make to sure that Union Carbide Corporation cleans up the pollution. So there were several legal action against the Union Carbide. In December 1984, the legal proceeding were started against Union Carbide Corporation and the United States and the Indian government local Bhopal authorities. So in March 1985, the government of India passed the Bhopal Gas Leak Act in March 1985 in Parliament, making the government of India to act as the legal representative for the victims of the disaster that helped in leading to the beginning of a legal proceeding. In 1985, the United States government called for an inquiry into the Bhopal gas disaster by the Henry Waxman, a Californian Democrat. In March 1986, the Union Carbide Corporation offered a settlement figure providing a fund for Bhopal victim of between $500 to $600 million over a period for 20 years. In May 1986, the US federal government transferred the litigation to Indian courts from United States. In 1988, 355 million US dollar was claimed by the government of India from Union Carbide Corporation. In November 1988, the Supreme Court told both sides to come to an agreement and start with a clean slate. And in 1989, Union Carbide Corporation, they agreed to pay 470 million US dollar for damages caused in the Bhopal disaster. So October 2003, the Bhopal Gas Tragedy Relief and Rehabilitation Department awarded the compensation to 5,54,895 people for injuries received and 15,310 to the survivors of those killed in the Bhopal gas leak. In June 2010, 7 ex-employees of company were sentenced to 2-year imprisonment and fined of rupees 1 lakh approximately, comes out to be 2,000 US dollar. That is after 26 years of leak. Now we may have to learn some lessons from Bhopal that the development control at the major hazard installation, we have to look into this, and a very large number of people were at risk from the plant at Bhopal, may be attributed to the encroachment or other settlement problem. There was a major problem attributed to the management of major hazard installations. There was a highly toxic substance at stake. There was a possibility, and it's very rarely, but there was a possibility of runaway reaction in storage, because usually we observe the runaway reactions in the reactors, but this is somewhat unprecedented when runaway reaction took place in the storage arena. Nobody ever thought about the water hazard in the plant, and that was attributed to the Bhopal gas tragedy. Relative hazard of the material in process and storage. So no one ever thought about this kind of approach. So these are some lessons which we may learn from the Bhopal gas tragedy. Apart from this, there are several other things which we need to address, like relative priority of safety and production. Because you can observe that the Union Carbide, they gave the priority to production rather than safety, and ultimately happened that they have to wind up their own business from India. So at the time of the accident, the plant was losing the money, and the lists a number of measures which had been taken apparently to cut the cost. We have already discussed those measures which were involved for the cutting of those costs. Some of them like the manning cuts and the cessation of the refrigeration, etc. There were the outcome of this particular Bhopal gas tragedy is there must be certain limitation on the inventory in the plant. The proper set pressure of the relief devices must be put forward. They have disabled the protective system, so some mechanism should be there so that once the protective system is disabled, then the production lineup should be modified accordingly. The maintenance of the plant and equipment and instrumentation was on the poor ground, so there may be a possibility, or there may be some approaches, or there should be some approach adopted for the proper maintenance of these plant equipment. Standard operating practices should be implemented for the isolation procedure while the maintenance is being carried out or a housekeeping being carried out, and there must be certain control of plant and process modification so that all the standard operating practices be followed. Apart from this, as we discussed that there was some communication gap between the authorities and the public. So UCIL, they had not provided the full information on the substances on site to the authorities. The emergency services workers or members of the public, they exposed to the hazard. Many workers interviewed and said that they had no information or a training about the various chemicals, those who are being stored, or they are those who are involved in the process area. So the training and experience, when these two aspects are in question, so Union Carbide was lacking behind. Then they were not having the adequate planning for the emergencies. So the response of the company and authorities to the emergency suggests that there was no effective emergency plan. So within the plant work, defects revealed by the emergency includes the hesitation about the use of the siren system and a lack of escape routes. So this is again because if you see the sequential order, sometimes they open the loud siren and then muted it, then they turned on the muted siren and so on. So they were in a bit of confusion. So this was not at all done. In consequence, the people exposed did not know what the siren meant or what action to take. The hospital did not know what they might be called on to handle and so on. So likewise, the essential action on the actual emergency is to inform the authorities what has happened and what the hazard are. So on the morning of the accident, the hospitals were in practically dark about the nature and effect of the toxic chemicals whose victims they were trying to treat. So practically there was no information available at the time of accident. So the lapses on the part of Union Carbide, they were having the improper design of chimneys without consideration of the weather condition in all seasons. So you see that the major quantity was released through the flaring tower. Now they were having the improper design and maintenance of the safety equipment. They were not following the safety norms and regulation as they are supposed to follow by the Union Carbide Corporation plant in United States. So decision to neglect a flare system in need of a repair, that was again a crucial issue, and it was a lapse on the part of Union Carbide. They were not fit with the adequate emergency planning and community awareness. They were having the lack of awareness of the potential impact of MIC on the community by the people operating the plant, and there was inadequate community planning allowing a large population to live near a hazardous manufacturing plant. So that was again a major issue, and just a year or less than a year ahead, the state government gave the legal rights for those illegal squatters. Now let us have something related to the basic green chemistry principles. So these principles would have averted the disaster if they had been followed. Now, one thing is that to eliminate or reduce the production of hazardous chemical, that is the first protocol. The hazardous chemicals produced should not be stored or should be consumed in course of the reaction. So, just to avoid this type of thing, the inventory size must be as low as possible. So, the inventory of hazardous chemical, if inevitable, should be in small containers and not on one large container. So, that reduces the chance of any kind of hazardous scenario. There are certain other suggested solutions that alpha naphthol or a on carbyl group addition followed by the reaction with methylamine would eventually give carbaryl. So, this process does not generate or require handling the phosgene. So, the process does not require any kind of storage of MIC. So, this practically process is inherently safe. So, the Union Carbide could have adopt this particular process rather than utilizing the phosgene, etc. So, these are there's some toxic materials in the soil and water like benzene, dichlorobenzene, polynuclear aromatic benzene, etc. So, additionally this dichlorobenzene and trichlorobenzene were found in the soil and water samples when they were analyzed at the vicinity of Union Carbide plant and within and outside the plant. So, lead, nickel, copper, chromium, hexachlorocyclohexane and chlorobenzene, they were found in soil samples. So, mercury was found to be between 20,000 to 60 lakh times the standard level in soil. So, that is extremely dangerous scenario and may lead to the carcinoma. There are certain ethical issues before the disaster. So, workers were forced to use the English manual even though only a few understand the language. That was a major problem. So, they were not practically trained or they didn't have the knowledge about the various safety issues. And 70% of the plant employees were fined for refusing to deviate from the proper safety regulations, replacing the leaked pipe, etc. So, this was again one of the ethical issue. As of 2008, Union Carbide Corporation had not released information about the possible composition of the cloud gas. So, they withhold that particular type of information. Now, several internal studies which exhibit several severe contamination, they were not made public. So, this is again the ethical issue. One of the another reason is that environmental change. In 1950, the population of Bhopal was around 70,000. 1956 became the state capital. In 1984, the population was around 6,95,000. So, the national government and international agencies should focus on widely applicable technique for the corporate responsibility and accident prevention as much in the developing world context as in advanced industrial nation. And this was lacking behind in the Union Carbide Corporation because they didn't follow the same safety norm those who are applicable in West Virginia plant. So, the local government clearly cannot allow the industrial facilities to be situated within urban area regardless of the evaluation of a land use over time. Now, industry and government need to bring the proper financial support to local communities so that they can provide better medical and other necessary services to reduce morbidity and mortality and material loss in case of any industrial accident. Existing public health infrastructure needs to be taken into account when hazardous industry choose site for manufacturing the plant. Now, the legislation and the regulation then need to evolve in active consultation with all stakeholders, laying emphasis on emergency requirement and increasing standards with appropriate emphasis on actual functioning of safety mechanisms and inclusions of an active safety culture. So, multinational by virtue of their global purpose, organization and resources should be treated as a single monolithic agent rather than as a network of to discrete or non-interdependent unit. Now, there were certain alternatives before the disaster. The first alternative was try to increase the product sales. So, they were keep all the product productions, etc. And second was the seize production and dispose MIC chemical gas, that is sale for the local resident, the cost of disposing the gas in very large quantity. The third and the last alternative was the seize production to keep the MIC chemical but continue to perform the regular maintenance. Now usually this does not cost too much and it is relatively safer for the local resident, but they didn't follow this one. Another things which is alternative after the disaster, that is compensate to the victims. So the increasing the compensation to help people survive, that was one of the prime motto, and providing at least 20 years worth of medical expenses. Although when the DNA sequencing or the gene structure is concerned, this time frame is very small. Another alternative is that properly clean up the site and provide the safe drinking water for the nearby people. Now so that the new generation will not be poisoned. So recommendation before the disaster, obviously the alternative 3 is recommended, and management should elect to cease the active production on the plant but continue regular maintenance. And MIC or methyl isocyanate is a highly reactive and deadly gas that remained in the tanks after production was cut off. So the reason was why there was no market in India for the Union Carbide's pesticides, and therefore they follow the plant should cease the operation, and with the safety of Indian citizen in mind, regular maintenance should continue to prevent any kind of disaster. Now there are several recommendations following the disaster. The victim need to be the better compensated, although the era is gone. Now they have endured much suffering and deserve better treatment than they have received to date. Provided the compensation for at least 20 years worth of the medical expenses at the opposed to the 5-year originally offered, and that was the part and parcel of the settlement. The key component of the new compensation settlement, the consultation with the victims, and the victims should have a same compensation level as they were the ones who have suffered. Another is that the fully clean up the Union Carbide site, which is not at all being done as on date. The chemicals left behind by the Union Carbide continue to cause environmental damage and poison the new generation. There are enough sufferings that occurred in India and upcoming generation. They should not be exposed to the deadly chemicals. That is one of the desired level. So it need to be made certain that the soil and water near the plant and they are not contaminated with the chemicals. So we can avoid, once we follow this thing, we can avoid such type of things. Thank you very much.